Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'd love to introduce these two fine educators, Toybi Rubladis and Jay Wright, who are here to present Fly a Kite. How exciting! On the less than 12-hour range students. So, without further ado, I think we know the drill by now. Welcome, and I'm going to pass it on over. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Karen. So this cover slide is really to make sure everybody knows they're in the right place. That was the title. So this should be kind of self-explanatory that everybody is in the right place. I'll move here our introductions. I'll let Toybi introduce herself, and then I'll introduce myself, and I'll probably be talking for most of the first half of the presentation, and Toybi will be guiding through most of the second half. We'll be interjecting, of course, but Toybi, go ahead and introduce yourself if you don't mind.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, everybody, for being here this Friday morning. It is pretty early, and it is admirable that you are all here to join us. And Jay and I are happy to have you here because I'll be sharing a little bit of some of the action and research work that I've been doing at my school. I am the principal at Corona Norco Adult School, and I've been an adult educator for all of my adult life because I started teaching English as a second language by fluke sometime in 1994 in New Delhi, and then I came to the US, and I thought that was a good time to change my career when I came to the US, but I couldn't get anything better. So my heart is still in teaching. So I ended up teaching at Corona Norco Adult School as a part-time adult ed teacher at night and daytime ESL teacher at the community college. But eventually I'm lucky to be part of the Corona Norco family. And this is my 5th year as an administrator.
All right, thank you. And I'm Jay Wright from CASAS. I'm the accountability manager, do a lot of trainings all over by the looks of the participants. I've probably, worked with you, in your region sometime in the past. So moving to the next slide, these are the main things we're going to go over as we're going to talk about the issue related to 12 hours of instruction. Oversimplified, long story short, in the first half, I'll talk about a few TE reports, surprise, surprise, surprise. And we'll also look at some of the data. Some of it is updated. We did recently update end of year DIR. So we'll look at some of the data. I think the long story short there is the 12 hours of instruction data. Kind of looks like that same check mark that our NRS performance and persistence and, CAPE summary data looks like, but we will show the data. And then second half, we'll turn it over to Toybi, who's done a lot of really good research with her team at Corona Norco on this issue. The other thing I wanted to bring up is I do realize now I like serials. That is SERIAL, not CEREAL, but serials, and that we have installments. That seems to be the name of the game. This is another one where I think this is the 4th installment of this that Toybi and I have done together. We've advanced it a little more. And I got to say, on her end, there's a lot of data results that we sort of took a teeny tiny peek at the last time we did this at the CASA Summer Institute in June, but it was literally hot off the presses. So there wasn't enough time to really get into it, but there's more time to get into it now. It's not quite so hot off the presses. So that's really, I think, the buy-in to why it's really worthwhile is there's going to be some great data that Toybi has that I don't think anybody's really been able to sink their teeth into yet. The last thing, and we tested this, we had a wonderful cutesy little Charlie Brown video we were going to show, but we couldn't figure out a way to do it without blasting you with a bunch of ads. So we decided that would be bad, but we call it Fly a Kite. If you know Charlie Brown, there's that actually more the springtime Charlie Brown special. The fall special is my more favorite analogy related to Lucy with the football. But in the spring, there's always that little shtick where Charlie Brown's out. That's right. Good grief, Charlie Brown. He's trying to fly a kite. It always ends up in failure. It always ends up looking, something closer to this, of course. Thank you, Carla. Perfect segue. So the reason why we like that analogy, or at least I do, I'll say, is that that's kind of how we look at the 12 hours of instruction. When you're flying a kite, it's really, really, really hard to get it off the ground. It seems like it ought to be easy, but it's always about 50 times more difficult than you think it ought to be. Once you get it up in the air, it's not so bad. It usually stays flying pretty well, but getting it off the ground is difficult. That's kind of the point we're making here, is you really need to focus on those first 12 hours of instruction. With a lot of students, that makes or breaks their time in adult ed. If you get them off the ground past that 12 hours, not always, but usually the result is a really good partnership. If they don't get past that 12 hours, then, you probably won't. That's kind of our bottom line. We have the video to try to illustrate it. I think that description, not as good as the video, but hopefully better than nothing. With that, we'll move on. I do want to start with some TE reports. This is the Cape Summit. So I got to say there are definitely some official Cape activities that relate to this issue. So it really seems remiss if we don't at least point it out. We've spent a lot of time the last year talking about Cape goal setting. That is at the consortium level. Like it or not, everybody has a goal to monitor how many students move from the 0 hours bucket to the 1 to 11 hours. At the agency level, everybody has, like it or not, how many students move from the 1 to 11 hours bucket to the 12 or more hours bucket. That is, if they're in the 12 or more hours bucket, they're officially participants. When they're officially participants, they qualify for the Cape summary. They qualify for Cape outcomes. Oh, by the way, that also means they qualify for payment points and NRS federal reporting outcomes. You might say not so coincidentally. Also not so coincidentally, we're presenting this as a new report. It's not really that new. We've had it in TE for about a year, but we have a couple new hours reports. One is the Cape enrollees by hours. The enrollees by hours is laid out a lot like the Cape summary. The same 3 categories you know and love from the Cape summary, with a little more detail related to hours. Again, those 3 buckets within each of those categories. How many students have 12 or more hours? How many have 1 to 11 versus how many have 0? We've got those nifty little arrows to hopefully kind of point out what I'm talking about. Here's just a blown up version, so you can see the different buckets, the number of enrollees that appear in the Cape summary in that particular area, and then a breakdown of the different hours categories. That is 609 plus 98 plus 148, hopefully equals 855, just for a quick example. There's another, again, not really new, but semi-new report called services by hours. The purpose of this, the same as the one I just showed you, but kind of looking at it in an inside out way. It's not directly related to the Cape summary like the other one, but it breaks it down into those service categories. It's a little bit more. I'm sorry, I'm playing musical slides, but if you look at this right-hand section, that is the services section of this report, same as the services section of the Cape summary. That is, where people go that don't have any hours. As a lot of you people know who really dig into this, a lot of times you'll get big numbers in that right-hand services section. Sometimes that's because you really are providing a lot of short-term services to your students, and a lot of people are there because that's where they belong. Other times, that shows up there because of what I call clutter, students without hours, import, export issues, duplicate students, orphan records, et cetera, et cetera. So the service enrollees by hours allows you to look at that services section and be able to see how many of the students actually have the different kinds of services. Short oversimplified answer here being, if you have big numbers here in these different services, then that suggests, yeah, you've got a lot of people there because you're providing services. If you've got real low numbers on this report, then you can probably more safely assume a lot of those numbers and services are more related to just those that don't have hours or demographics or whatever. Here's a newer report. This one's not brand new, but more like 3 months old instead of an hour old or a year old. I don't know why I said hour, but outcome enrollees by hours. This is just another kind of inside out way to look at it. This one is breaking it down into the services categories. This one is breaking it down into those different outcomes categories where you can look and say, okay, of those that made literacy gains, of those that made I3 gains, et cetera, where do the students break down in those different hours categories? So overall, this is kind of a segue. I'll just stop. Actually, I will stop here. You could do that in the, I'm gonna give it short shrift, but I'll answer it. You can do that in the setup window, the same way you would do on that Kate program hours, because I know you're asking it, Carla. You know what I'm talking about. I'll just apologize. I'm not sure everyone does, but there's that Nova format. So this is just showing you that default Nova format like they have in Nova, where they shovel it all in. I think you can do it at the you can't drill down, but you can make the same changes where you can break down ABE, ASE. I think it's a 3-way split where you can do it the way they do it in Nova. You can parse out, ABE from ASE. You can also parse it out so it's ABE, HSE, and HS diploma. I think there's a 3-way split there, but it's all governed from the setup window. I'll just say what we're showing now is the default view, because it is the way it is in Nova. We set the default view to the way they have it in Nova. Okay, thank you. Great question. We know people are paying attention. That definitely did way more than enough to give me the warm and cozy, and move to the next slide. So this is just a recap of a lot of things we've been talking about. I won't get into it too much. I've had a couple other sessions, this week that got into this more, but hey, you look at this data, you check out, in this case, hours information, just, we've been talking about what do you do for the next steps, quantitative, using data reports. I like to use that Sesame Street analogy. Find areas of particularly strong or not very strong performance, focus on the neediest areas, focus on some of those that look better than expected as well, see which of those is not like the others, what are they doing different, that might represent something a little better or worse than everybody else, make those adjustments, accordingly, qualitatively follow up with your students, follow up with your staff, find out what they say, are the areas of strength and areas of weakness, and so on. I'm using that as a segue to get into this data dive section. That is a little deeper with these reports. We've talked about goals. Here's, a way to look at that first, consortium level goals. That is, how many are moving from that 0 hours bucket to the 1 to 11 hours bucket. This, you can kind of look at this report to see those numbers and track, how many are in each one. This is, a deeper screenshot on that agency level goal where you're looking at moving from 1 to 11 to 12 hours. This is a little more case specific slide to show you which columns and which cells you might review to track your performance in that particular goal area. Changing gears a little bit, looking at the DIR, I'm changing gears a little bit because there is an updated DIR document. The updated document focuses more on NRS than Kate, but I really do think the pattern of the numbers is the same. I'm being a little loosey-goosey here, but generally if you tack on like a point or two to the NRS numbers, that's basically what the Kate numbers are. The patterns with NRS and Kate tend to be the same. Overall, it's the same data patterns, but because it's Kate, because it's not quite as punitive, some of those clutter numbers like 12 hours and demographics on the Kate side are typically a point or two higher than they are in NRS. But again, the patterns are the same. Here's a link to where you can download a new document that includes end of year data from 21-22, where you can look at all the DIR items and compare and contrast by region. You can compare and contrast what you're doing at your own agency to the statewide numbers. Here's a little bit of a deeper dive on that. This one is, I gotta say, hot off the presses from just about an hour and a half ago. How's that for a good little true confessions? So you can't get any newer than that. Okay, I see what you're talking about. Sorry, it's taken me a minute to do. All right, it might take a while. This is a heavy PowerPoint, by the way, so it'll take a couple minutes to show up. But here's the updated DIR data. Hey, by default, you're going to get a nifty update on missing birth date. Believe me or don't believe me, but the slide and all these screenshots really did look better with that extra row, so I just left it in there. But you can see here's 4 years worth of, less than 12 hours of instruction statewide data going back to 2018-19. You can see that same kind of, you might say, reverse check mark that we've been talking about with lots of our other data when we're talking about table 4, persistence, you name it. Lately, our data tends to look like a reverse check mark, meaning we were starting to look pretty good there around 18, 19. Things took a little dip for obvious reasons in 1920, took an even bigger dip for the same obvious reasons in 2021, 21, 22, we got better. We're still not as good as we were 3 or 4 years ago, but we are a lot better than we were 1 year ago. You can see all these numbers kind of follow those same patterns like we've talked about with lots of other data performance issues. Here's a little more specifically how we did last year. This is breaking it down a little bit into those extra, buckets we have on the DIR. Again, not enough time to dig into some of these basic issues, but most of you, I think, have a pretty good handle on this. On the DIR, we have categories that pretty much match those different buckets we talked about a few minutes ago for CAPE reporting. That is, we have the overall number of qualified or the overall number of learners that have less than 12 hours. And then we break it down into those extra buckets of those that don't have the 12 hours. How many of them are there because they're 0 or empty versus how many of them are there because they have hours, but just not quite 12. You can see 0 hours tends to be the bigger issue. That's true this past year. That's true pretty much every year. That really hasn't changed. Although I will say in the COVID years, the 0 hours was the more fluctuating factor, that drove our, problems, up more so than the 1 to 11. I'll just say, hey, here's a little comparison where we've got our most recent year, the breakdown by those different buckets. Here below that is a little comparison from where we stood in 2021. I'm going fast and furious here. I'm doing a lot of overgeneralization, but we've had some discussions over the last year where we've tried to look at this in a little bit more detail. I've got to say the most recent year, for the most part, just reinforce these basic points we've been talking about over the last year or two. That is, when you're looking at these hours, that 0 hours bucket tends to be the more dominant factor. It's more dominant in that it tends to govern the overall percentage we have with less than 12. It tends to also be more dominant in that, the ebb and flow of good data performance and bad data performance at both the local and state level tends to, be more manipulatable. I'm not sure if I'm phrasing it right. If you govern the 0 hours bucket, than it is 1 to 11. 1 to 11 you can control, but not as well usually as you can with the 0 hours bucket. And here's just repeating with what I just said. The fluctuation, tends to be governed by 0 hours, not 1 to 11. Not so coincidentally, in those COVID years when we had more problems with this, COVID tended to create a lot more with 0 hours. Some would say that's a little counterintuitive with the idea that students show up and then COVID hits and then they don't. But really, I think the COVID issues at the agency level related to how well agencies are collecting this data, quite frankly, had a bigger impact on our COVID numbers than students, appearing and disappearing. The other thing, and this I think is, explained in other issues, but the 0 hours tends to be governed more by data reporting and cleanup issues. 1 to 11 tends to be affected more by actual student ebb and flow. But again, by cleaning up your data and focusing on that, that typically minimizes the number with 0, which, back to the first bullet, tends to keep the less than 12 hours numbers under control. And then finally, the 1 to 11 hours really tended to stay pretty constant. It, of course, did bump up during the COVID years, but in much less, less noticeable than the 0 hours. And I'll just say again, 1 to 11 can be improved by data collection and cleanup, but gotta say that 0 hours is what really gets helped when you do that extra cleanup. So you're saying, yeah, it could well be, not sure which bucket that would affect more, probably the 0, but yes, I agree, Carla. Okay, I'll say any questions or comments there. I am moving quickly because I really do want to turn it over to Toynbee here. Actually, sorry, one more thing I did want to bring up here, sorry, is that I wanted to relate it to some things we've been talking about at the state level. And this will be a good segue to Kobe's research, or to Toynbee's research. I don't know why I said Kobe. Sorry about that. Anyway, we've been talking about this concept called student pain points. This is an NRS or federal level term. This is the term the feds have been using to refer to issues at a typical school, whether it's, in the recruitment phase or the registration phase or the enrollment or when they're in class or when they finish instruction. That is all the different ways in which students are touched by your school, and looking at it every step of the way and trying to find out which are the steps that are painful for students. Sometimes it's just missing the bus and not knowing adult ed exists. Sometimes it's, an overly cumbersome enrollment process. Sometimes it's an orientation. Sometimes all that's fine, but the problem is more once they're in class, but a lot of the, it varies from agency to agency, but no matter what, it really, is a common denominator all over is the need to focus on those first 12 hours. That is when you're determining program, class, and level placement, when they're meeting their teacher and meeting the other students for the very first time. Are they getting access to the teacher or counselor, relating those goals to placement and so on. That is, those first 12 hours really tend to be the make or break time, that back to that fly a kite. If you can really double down a little bit in the first 12 hours, then maybe you can scale back after that a little bit, once they're up and running. That is, once Charlie Brown has that kite flying up in the air. So I'll use that as a good time for me to, squelch myself a little bit and turn it over to Toynbee so she can kind of take over and talk about the research.
There's some good chat going on, and I'm trying to respond to them as well. And yes, Jay, first of all, I wanted to say thank you for adding the hours of instruction and also having a bucket for the 0 hours, because it's critical that the 0 hours are separated from the 1 to 11 hours. And like Carla says, of course, there are times we have students enrolled and they're waiting to start a class. So they will still be on our list with the 0 hours, but they will not get any hours if they are not attending a class. Yep. So thanks again, Jay, for a wonderful start with the data and how we get all that data and the good latest goal setting CAPE data in comparison with the last 3 years also, last 4 years also, that really shows that, persistence and performance go hand in hand. But there was a slide in between where Jay ends and I start with the cutesy little Charlie Brown video, but we actually got rid of it. So I wanted to ask everybody in the audience, before I get to my part, let's do a waterfall chat so that we get a little bit of engagement going with it, which is, what is performance and how is it measured in your own words? Just take a minute to write it in the chat so later we can all save the chat and also learn from each other. Think about it. What is performance and how is it measured at your agencies? Ready to put it in the chat? Ready, set, go. Waterfall. It's all coming in. Thank you. Thank you. Measured in level gains. Performance can be measured in measurable skills gains.
Wow.
Progress in pre and post, CASAS testing. It is measured by goals. Students create their success.
This really is a
completing their
gathering
goals.
of the faithful here, you know, all these CASAS-y sort of answers.
Love it.
Good
right?
grief.
It's the result of various elements working together. I love that, Carla.
Yeah.
All right, thank you everybody for indulging a little bit on that. And so when we talk about performance, we're talking about setting goals and getting the students to meet their goals, et cetera, et cetera. But can we have enough performance if we don't have persistence? That's the question, right? So persistence is important. We may be enrolling a lot of students, but if those students do not stay, they continue to leave because they are Charlie Brown, they're struggling to stay or keep their kite up or they keep their game up, then we keep losing. And it's also the reason why it's important to look at the 12 hours of instruction. In addition to that, I have these enrollment is really important right now, right after the COVID. All of us are struggling to increase our enrollment, and that's our biggest objective. We enroll the students, but we cannot keep them. First, to get to enroll them is our goal. But then if we cannot keep the enrolled people, we're losing out again. Because low enrollment means low payment points, but not just that. If we cannot keep the ones who came to us and we fail to retain them, we're losing trust in them, their trust in us. It's important that we maintain their trust in us. They came to us with a goal. They already thought, hey, this year I'm going to get my GED, or I'm going to finish this, I'm going to finish that, or I'm going to get my high school diploma. They come to us, but if we cannot keep them, then somehow or the other, something that we did not match their needs. And so they have gone from us, and that is when we lose trust, their trust in us. And so it also means it's a cost, because we have put in efforts to bring them into our doors. They have somehow come to us, but they did not persist and they left. And the reasons for persistence could be many. There could be lots of research we can do. We all have our hypothesis on why our students leave, and we still don't know what is the magic portion to give them so that they would stay once they come with us. And ultimately, of course, we all as agencies, if we do not have those students to persist, we do not have the performance. And that also means a loss on the payment points for us to be able to continue to serve more people. This is for NRS, but even CAPE, CAPE can also start looking to say, hey, let's see which schools are, or which way we can get more students to complete what they came to us for. So these are big picture things, and this is why it's so important and critical for us to look into those students that come to our doors and leave. And I'll share more reasons why, how many of them leaving and why so much are leaving. I don't know all the reasons, but we're doing some research and some things. So I just wanted to share that. Jay, the next slide, please. The slides are kind of cue for me to remember what I have to talk about, right? So I was very fortunate to have worked at Corona Norco for many, many years as a part-time teacher. And while I was a part-time teacher, I got to do my admin credential. During my credential, I did a study on our school, the master's part, where I did integration of technology in adult schools. And what I learned from that little study I did was, often we have all these support systems with us, but we fail to communicate those support systems to all students that comes through our door. So what happens is they don't know what we have, and they end up not taking advantage of the support systems that we provide them. After I did that, I also wanted to study a little bit more on, do teachers and the teacher characteristics enhance learner persistence? Because persistence is such a big deal. You know, I had this hypothesis that there are certain teachers who are able to keep students longer in their classes, because as I was teaching those 10 years, I noticed that some of my colleagues are better off at keeping the class full throughout the school year, where some of us were losing students like crazy. And then I wanted to see what type of teachers keep students longer in their classes, because that persistence is so important, right? So for my doctorate studies, I decided I would do something on that same thing. And that, not because I wanted to do it, because I was in a culture where we looked at numbers. I had a wonderful mentor and a director that really looked at numbers all the time. And then my colleague, who was also working with me as an admin, we all can continue to look at numbers and why students leave, or why some classes are keeping all the 40 students we give enroll in their classes, where some classes are losing students and we give them 40 to begin with, they end with 12 or 15, you know, and so we wanted to look at that. So, but for my doctorate, I could not study our own schools. So I ended up studying these 6 schools in the Inland Empire region, right? And in these 6 schools, these are a number of students in those classes. So what the study I did was not just, you know, 1,000 students here and there, it's about 20,000 students in this region. So to the next slide, please. So to learn and to look at persistence and the persistence score in these classes, what I did was I looked at the data was actually not from TE, but it was from ASAP, and most of us use ASAP. And to collect the raw data, what I got was the master's report that I got from ASAP that is called Class Enrollment and Total Attendance Hours and Homeschool by Time Period. On my very last slide at the end, you will see exactly how to get to that, and you are welcome to look at it yourself, because we look at that very often and it is very insightful. So what I did was I looked at the total student class days. So for example, we know we are adult school, there's open entry, open exit. So not all students are coming in at the same time. All of our students come at different times of the year. So what we do is the first day the student comes to class, and then so here we are not looking at the ones who are 0 hours, because if they are 0 hours, they won't even show up on that list, right? So we're looking at students the first day of attendance to the last day of the class, not the student, because some students come in the middle of the semester or middle of the session, and used available class days for the students. So if I look at the number of classes that are available from the start date to the end of the session of that course, and how many days they stayed, that is what the persistence score. This is how I looked at it, okay? The next slide will show us. Like I said, originally, let's hold off explaining this slide for a second here. Originally, my study was to look at the teachers' persistence scores and compare it to the teachers' personalities or their characteristics, and to see what type of teachers kept the students longer. However, the biggest finding that I got is not truly about the teachers and the students, but more about the attrition rate in our schools. In those 6 schools that I studied, what I noticed is this chart that was just shocking, right? And so if you see that, if this in the chart, you see from 0 to the 10, point, or say 1 to 10, say, if a student were to stay 10 hours, the first hour or at the 0 mark, you see that the bar is the tallest at the left end. That means That's the highest number of time when the students dropped, right? So the students came into class within the first few hours of class is when students already dropped out. And that's so high in the beginning. And that's when I started saying, looking at the first few hours of student, making sure that students don't drop out within that. And if we can help them to sustain that first few hours of instruction, they will continue to stay later. And that whole Charlie Brown activity of, think of once getting the kite up the ground is the biggest challenge, right? Once they're up there, maybe some will drop for sure. We are adult schools, adults have lives, things happen and they leave, but that will make the biggest difference is my understanding out of this doctorate studies that I did. And I also put a copy of it at the very end page. Feel free to read it. It's a lot of it, but don't worry about reading all the theory that came before the study, but feel free to read the last chapter and also the poster that I put there. The poster gives you an entire picture of what my dissertation in a poster page. So when I learned this, I thought, I could just keep it to myself or share it with the field so that all of us learn from this. And that is why this has become my big thing with Jay all the time, the 12-hour instruction, 12-hour instruction. Why 12-hour instruction? But that is because if they have persisted 2 weeks with us, we know that they will persist. Now, the next point is to study why do they drop out in the first 2 weeks more? And what can we do to help them to sustain and persist the first 2 weeks and more, right? And so all of us, I hear a lot of my colleagues, a few that I, presented with the first day, 2 days ago with Jay. Thanks to Jay, I get to introduce to all these lovely people who do a lot of wonderful work at their schools, and hearing things that they are doing at their school really encourages me to do more. And then whatever we learn as a group together, if all of us can share, this is not a matter of just keeping the school and the field afloat. It is to serve the community who really, really needs us. And we all know as adults, I myself have gone through it. If you have to go back to school after being an adult, it is a huge challenge, just changing your mindset of that learning, getting into a grit mindset where you feel like, oh, this is tough, but I'm going to ride this out, Jay, can we go to the next slide, please? So to me, that persistence and performance is such a huge deal. And we need to have a lot of more deeper discussions on this, right? What happens when we have students leave us when they have less than 12 hours, right? Because, sometimes this is just my thought. It's not theory or it's just a theory. It's not, a study. We haven't done anything on it. But, these are questions that we have to all work together to help, because the ones who persist, they already know they want something and they're there. But the ones who don't persist are the ones who need us most, Can we gain performance from students who do not persist? I've already asked this before. What systems are in place at your agencies to reduce the attrition? That's the question. And how can analyzing the reasons why students drop out, and getting support accordingly. And some of us are really doing good things at this. And I've heard a lot of good things, but there's one little study that we did in our school, and I just wanted to share the findings from that. Next slide, please, Jay. That's just a case study. As you have heard, my school is not that big. It's a medium-sized school. Last year we served about 1,500. Before the pandemic, about 28 to 3,000 students. The study that we did on the next slide, you will see is, so looking at all the reports that Jay showed us, we have done something like looking at the 13 hours of students, less than 12-hour students, and the 0-hour students. And when we look at that, we see if they have 13 or more hours, great. We have to still continue to help the students and serve them well. If they are less than 12 hours, we give them, if they dropped out, we give them an opportunity to re-enroll. If they did not drop out, but they're still less than 12, I send out messages directly to the students. Sometimes teachers call the students and to check into them. And if it is a 0 hour, it's an opportunity to re-enroll them. Like Carla said, though, of course, without teachers and staffing, that's another issue. That's a big other discussion. Next slide, please.
What I will bring up is Carla has a good question. Was there any breakdown in this related to instructional program?
Yes, yes. So we did a little market study. So the first step we did, we looked at it, we got all the students with less than 12 hours attendance. And then we took the students of 0 hours, separated from 1 to 11 hours. We removed students with more than 12 hours in a different program, and set a target to complete the survey with at least 30% of students from each category. So we separated them by the program as well. The goal was to have a representative study of students with less than 12 hours across all programs. Next slide, please. And I was very fortunate, Corona Norco is very fortunate to have diverse talents. In one of our instructors and also our CT coordinator has a marketing background, so she helped us put this little survey together. So we were going to do this market study, but then of course, for a study to be unbiased and very, very objective, we had to have a script, and that's when she helped us create the script. And the script goes something like this: hello, I'm so and so, and first we had to have those guidelines so that what we're doing is not biased and very, very clear objective. So we had created a script. Next page, please. So we also learned, and this is from another presentation I did last year around the same time, and this, I should say that this is also a sequel to the presentation that Jay and I did last year on shine a spotlight on the 12 hours or more students, less than 12 hour students. So from that discussion, from the crowdsource input we got, everybody's been saying, use your teachers, Teachers are the best interviewers. So we used some of our teachers, and using interviewing techniques for unbiased qualitative information, we surveyed those 210 students, and the finding is on the next page slide, please. So the biggest finding is, out of those 215 students we surveyed, 29% of them had changed or stopped coming because of work schedule. 20% of them had personal reasons. 13% had family obligations because it's right around the time of COVID, so they were taking care of family members, etc. 10% had class availability or scheduling issues. And the rest, 28%, had other reasons. Okay, so I will talk more about this and we will get to it. But just to give you a sense, those 28% of them are the areas where we never thought would be a problem, where students are voicing their opinion. That's the part that is the most important part, right? Because the others we already knew. Oh, students have work schedules, so we can have a plan for it. Personal reasons may come up. Okay, that we cannot deal with so much. We're going to leave that aside. Family obligations are there, but also how can we support our students? And we know a lot of our students, they have culture. They come from cultures where education is not a big deal, and especially as an adult. Why would you go to school? It's your children's time right now. It's not your time. So those kind of things that we know, we already. So what we learned more was from those 28%. So Jay, if you don't mind hitting the link, on the same page, the findings, it's a hyperlink. It should go to a Google slide, Google Doc, I mean. So probably you're going to see it as a new page.
Can you see the new page, or do I need to kind of stop sharing and go out? I'm not quite sure if you can see it or not, or if it's set to the PowerPoint.
It's set to the PowerPoint. So maybe if you unshare, I can share my.
Yeah, it's all right. I can go to it. Here it is. I'll just switch. I think it should be showing now.
Okay, so this page has more details. Feel free to read them more later. So I talked about the 221 students we we called, and you can scroll Jay, and then I already shared about this. So here are the reasons here. The third column is so important. So those are some things that we uncovered. We had incorrect attendance recording. And so this is a school agency problem, right? So our problems were different. Your problems may be different, right? We also learned that some students were inappropriately placed in that class. And there was no class information. And so we got those. And so this is a data cleaning up issue as well, right? Completers with 12 hours or less, lack of teacher follow through, so there are some things that we can do something about, but there are some things we cannot do anything about. It's just a matter of data collection. And then there's the lack of teacher follow up there. One of the students also said something about, we learned that it's a technical issue problem. And then by technical issue, it's because, the student was put in one class and then they were transferred to another class. And then when the data moved over, they still stayed in this bucket. And the class environment issues were there. Transportation errors, the students were not fully registered, but it showed like they were registered or somehow something happened. So those were some things we found. And in general, if you scroll down below, Jay, so from these findings, what we learned was that 24 out of the 61 students, they were unable to attend due to the change in their work schedule. And so we know that we have morning classes and evening classes, but something that we learned also is that those students did not know that they could switch. And then because it was returning after COVID, this was a study we did last year. So less than 1% of the students mentioned that the daycare was a suggestion for improvement. And we have taken that into heart and we started providing childcare at 2 centers that we have now. Almost a third, 28 of them were non-persistent students are classified under the variety of issues. This is the same thing I've already explained in the last column in the previous table above. So we can scroll down. So I think I've shared all of this here already. I've discussed this. We also learned that online ingenuity was also an issue with some students. Class placement category 23% was mostly from the ESL students, expressing a need for more basic level. And we've already taken this to heart. And this year we are providing more lower level classes that is leveled. Partner locations have multi-level classes, and that was also an issue with some students. And so there were a few students in the computer classes also who talked about their levels were either too high or too low, their placement was wrong. So which also helped us to correct how we do our computer basic classes now this year. Lack of teacher follow-up, 13% students working remotely, self-paced and unable to contact teachers. The lack of understanding of what to do next. So teachers were not following up on time. So this year we've already put in a action in place where every week students will check in with students, teachers will check in with the students who do not come to class, or make sure that every week, every student has a touch point some way or the other. So some action items we've taken are those. Then no class information, 10% includes students who were told staff would follow up and provide them virtual class information, but the students never received the information. So there were gaps here and there that we found out. And all of these, we are trying to rectify some of those this year by putting some of these actions in place, by revamping our orientation to share common frequently asked questions and concerns. So now we have all of our 3 different programs. All the orientation has the same look and feel. They all start with the same way of discussing the important items, and then we diversify a little bit with the program specific information. And we have all of these on our website as well for students to go and access it after the orientation date, because what happens is most of the time we learned that our orientation was you come in, get this, fire hose of information, and then the rest of the semester we expect them to remember what we said, which is not the case with any one of us, right? So now we have all of that on our website. Those are some actions we took. High school diploma classes structuring, we have completely changed. Now we make sure that students have that warm handoff from the ABE teacher to the ASC teacher, or the same teacher follow through, but at least students get to know that they're moving up. Screening of students at entry for computer skills. We've started that so that we have a small little quiz to make sure that students are at a basic, intermediate, or advanced level in their computer classes before they are placed in the classes. For the ESL multi-level classes, we have now kind of tried to put 2 classes at a location where there's a higher level group and a small lower level group, which we did not have before. Before we had 1 class that was all multi-level, and then we have some more future action items as well, and how to systematically and consistently connect with the students, and data discussion days, which I've learned from Kathleen last week, and we're going to start implementing them. Okay. Kathleen, I think you are here. I saw a comment from you before. So those are some things we are doing. So now we can get back to our slide. So those are some of the few things we did, part of what we learned from this action study at the end of last year. But going to the next slide. I have learned a lot more by presenting last year. And so this crowdsourced input, feel free to look at them when you get a chance. We got wonderful comments and input from every one of you in the audience last year, and that's all in there for all of us to share. I also put this little instruction last night, after Jay and I looked at the reports on CAPE tables. I told Jay, I tried to look it up myself. I can't find it, what's happening. So I thought, if I'm having problems, some of us in the audience would have too. So I put the how to get to the TE. You go to the reports, state reports, California, CAPE tables, and then report selection. You will see this clip right here on the right. And you have different choices. There's some of the reports that Jay showed to this morning are all on this list here, and you can select them from here, and that's how we get to those. And the best part is that you click and drill down to see which students are the ones in that category. I also put a link on how to get to that report that I mentioned, which I used for my study from ASAP. And my presentation, my dissertation, and the poster presentation is here for you to look at if you feel like, because last time after my presentation, a lot of people asked for it. So I thought I might as well put it in there. But of course, that is not the biggest finding, is not what I shared on what is on my dissertation. The biggest finding is that our students are dropping a lot more in the first few hours of instruction. I think that is the end of what I have put together for today. So anybody has any questions or comments? Jay, I think it's a good time for us to all just take some time to discuss.
I have a question. I kind of put it in the chat box. One of the issues that our school is having is students wanting to change classes. We try so hard to make sure that they're in the right class, but they come and they say the class is too hard, or they want to try a different class, and we do a two-week kind of thing where we try to keep the students in the class for 2 weeks, and then of course make sure that both teachers are communicating if they're going to transfer. But it just seems like it's happening more now. And a lot of the time it's because one of their friends is in another class, or they just want the easier route. And we're just trying to find ways of like, how can we control this a little bit better?
I'm sure the audience has a lot of responses as well to that. And one of the things that we do, and we've been doing this for a long time, is the test. We give them an intake test and also a pre-test, the CASAS pre-test, before we place a student in the class. So their placement is based on data. And so we show them their report on how they have scored in the test and how they did in the test. Also, of course, it depends very much on their availabilities and the class schedules that we have. So I know that students like to be with their friends, and that's been a big deal for us too. But if we start showing them numbers and getting them to also be, partners in this education journey, it takes a little bit more time and effort, but it has worked. But of course, I know that it still happens, despite the fact that we spend a lot of time with students advising them.
I'll
Yeah.
point out that Carla and Suzanne put some answers to your question, Daniel, in the chat too, that would definitely worth looking at.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you.
One last thing I did feel like, I can't seem to resist bringing up is back to that other category that Toynbee had. What really struck me when she showed me this yesterday, all the things that we like to make a really big stinking deal about are all in that teeny tiny little pie sliver labeled other. The things that we kind of overlook because, hey, we can't control student family issues or work schedule issues, so we don't really think about it, are the things that the students think are really important. The things that we pontificate on ad nauseum are kind of in that goofy little other category that the students kind of see as more irrelevant to the issue. So bridging that gap in terms of communicating with students, gotta say, seems like a big gap that we all have to bridge, because we all agree if we're gonna find out, we better find out from our students. But when we do, they tend to list issues that are kind of outside of what, yahoos like us pontificate about when we try to solve the problem. I'll just say that's what was in it for me. Okay, Juan brought up a great point to your question, Daniel. Guess I'll just say, hey, anybody with any last minute comments? Anybody want to verbalize any of this, or is everybody verbalized out? I guess we'll turn it back over to you then, Karen.
We just want to thank you both, Jay and Toynbee, for bringing in the practical, the theory, and something we can take back and use. So we appreciative of your time and space and energy in presenting today. I've posted the evaluation link, and I hope that all of you continue to have a wonderful Friday. Thank you again, and I'm going to go ahead and end this if you're ready.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
everybody,
Thank you.
and thank you.
Thank you
Karen.
for all your great chats. Really good chat in this session.
Wonderful group. I hope you don't mind I put the evaluation link in just a little bit early because I noticed people were leaving, and so, okay. Yeah. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
I hope
Thank you.
I hope to attend another one of your presentations. I learned so much. Take care.